Chapter 1, The Morning Catch. The sea was a sheet of hammered pewter under the pre-dawn sky. Mara Kincaid had been awake for an hour already, her hands moving with the practiced rhythm of a life spent on the water. The salt-scarred dock creaked beneath her boots as she loaded the last of the crab pots onto the Sea Whisper, her father's old boat. The vessel was 22 feet of fiberglass and memory, patched in a dozen places with fiberglass resin that never quite matched the original white. The motor coughed twice before it turned over, a mechanical protest that always made her hold her breath. She was 24 years old, with sun-bleached hair pulled back in a fraying elastic band, and hands that knew more about rope burn and fish gutting than manicures. Her eyes were the color of the sea on a stormy day, gray-green and full of something that was not quite sadness and not quite determination, but a blend of the two that had become her default expression. The village of Port Haven was still sleeping. A cluster of whitewashed cottages clung to the hillside like barnacles on a whale, their windows dark. The only light came from the yellow bulb above the harbormaster's shack and the faint phosphorescence of the wake as Mara guided the boat out of the harbor. She passed the lobster boats, the trawlers, the little dinghies that tourists sometimes rented in the summer, and then she was in open water, the salt spray cold on her cheeks. This was her inheritance. Not money, there had never been money. Not property, the cottage she shared with her mother was rented. But this, the knowledge of where the fish ran, the feel of the tide, the silence of the sea at dawn. Her father had given her that before the sea took him back, 3 years ago now. A rogue wave, the Coast Guard had said. A freak accident. They never found his body. Mara cut the engine when she reached the reef, a submerged ridge of limestone that created a natural nursery for snapper and grouper. She worked the lines with quick, efficient movements, hauling the pots that she had set the day before. The catch was decent, for legal-sized red snapper, a dozen blue crabs, and a grouper that would fetch a good price at the market if she could get it there before the heat set in. By the time the sun broke the horizon, spilling gold and rose across the water, she had a cooler half full and a dull ache in her lower back. She allowed herself a moment to rest, leaning against the gunwale and watching the light play on the waves. These moments were the only luxury she allowed herself. Everything else, every penny, every hour, belonged to survival. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a prepaid thing with a cracked screen. A text from her mother, "Can you pick up my prescription? Pain is bad today." Mara's jaw tightened. Her mother's rheumatoid arthritis had been getting worse, the fingers that once wove intricate baskets for the summer tourists now swollen and useless. The medication was expensive, even with the government subsidy, and the latest round of blood work had suggested something else might be going on, something the local clinic didn't have the equipment to diagnose. "I'll be there by noon," Mara typed back. "I love you." She stowed the phone and started the engine. Time to head to the market, haggle with the buyers, and make what little money the catch would bring. Another day in a life that felt like treading water in a storm, never going under but never reaching shore. The Port Haven Fish Market was a tin-roofed building at the edge of the harbor, where the smell of diesel mixed with the briny scent of fresh seafood. By the time Mara arrived, the place was already buzzing with activity. The commercial boats had come in earlier, their decks piled high with ice-packed tuna and swordfish destined for the city restaurants. Mara's modest cooler drew little attention as she claimed her usual spot at the end of the dock, a patch of concrete she'd been selling from since she was a teenager helping her father. Old Man Carver, the market's unofficial kingpin and the owner of the largest wholesale operation in the county, came by to inspect her catch. He was a thick man with a red face and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He poked at the snapper with a stubby finger, flipped over the grouper to check its gills, and then made an offer that was 30% below the going rate. "That's not even covering my fuel," Mara said, keeping her voice level. "The grouper alone is worth more than that at retail." Carver shrugged. "Then sell at retail." "Oh wait, you don't have a restaurant. You don't have a distributor's license. You got a cooler and a spot on my dock. Take it or leave it, sweetheart." She hated when he called her that. She hated that she had to take his price, every single time. There were other buyers, but Carver had a way of making life difficult for anyone who crossed him: late payments, accidental damage to equipment, rumors whispered to the health inspector. Mara had learned the hard way that the fish market, like the sea, had its own set of currents and predators. She took his offer, pocketing the thin stack of bills with a quiet dignity that cost her more than she would ever admit. By 10 o'clock, she was at the pharmacy on Main Street, handing over most of that money for a small white bag of pills. The pharmacist, a kind woman named Eleanor, gave her a sympathetic look but said nothing. There was nothing to say. The walk home took her past the harbor again, and it was then that she saw it, a sight so out of place that it stopped her in her tracks. A yacht was anchored in the deeper water beyond the breakwater. Not just any yacht, but a gleaming, three-deck vessel that looked like it had sailed straight out of a magazine. White hull, tinted windows, a helicopter pad on the upper deck. It was the kind of wealth that Port Haven usually only saw in the summer, when the holidaymakers came to rent cottages and pretend to be locals for a week. But it was early spring, and the tourist season was still a month away. Mara stared at it for a long moment, feeling a strange prickle at the back of her neck. Then she shook her head and kept walking. Rich people and their toys. They came, they took pictures, they left. They never changed anything. She had no way of knowing that this one was different. Chapter 2, The Stranger from the Sea. The next morning, Mara was at the dock before sunrise again, but this time she had company. A small tender from the yacht had motored into the harbor overnight and was now tied up at the guest dock, a sleek inflatable with a quiet electric motor that probably cost more than the Sea Whisper. And standing on the dock, looking around with the slightly lost expression of a man who was used to having people tell him where to go, was the yacht's owner. He was tall, with dark hair that was going silver at the temples, and he wore a pair of khaki trousers and a blue button-down shirt that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. His boat shoes were spotless. His sunglasses probably cost more than Mara's entire monthly income. He was, she estimated, somewhere in his late 30s or early 40s, and he was holding a fishing rod that was clearly brand new, still with the plastic tag on the reel. Mara tried to walk past him without making eye contact. She had work to do, and rich tourists asking for directions were a waste of time that she couldn't afford. "Excuse me," the man called out, his accent polished and neutral, the kind of accent that came from expensive private schools. "I'm looking for someone who can take me out fishing." Mara paused, her cooler balanced on one hip. "Charter boats are on the other side of the harbor," she said, jerking her chin toward the far dock. "They don't usually go out this early, but if you wave enough money, I'm sure someone will accommodate you." She started walking again, but the man's next words stopped her. "I don't want a charter boat. I want someone local. Someone who knows these waters. The captain of my yacht said there was a fisherwoman here who's the best on the coast." He pointed me toward this dock. Mara turned back, her eyes narrowing. "Who's your captain?" "Anders. Swedish fellow. Said he'd been watching the local boats for a few days and saw a woman in a small white boat out fishing everyone else. Said she knew exactly where to go, like she could read the water." A reluctant flicker of warmth kindled in Mara's chest. She knew Anders by sight, a grizzled old sailor who'd been crewing on various yachts for decades. The fact that he had noticed her, that he had recommended her, meant something. It didn't mean she had time for this, but it meant something. "I'm not a charter service," she said. "I'm commercial. I fish to sell, not for sport." "I'll pay you," the man said. He pulled a wallet from his back pocket, leather, monogrammed, and extracted a stack of bills. "I'll pay you double whatever you'd make at the market today. Triple, if you can show me something interesting." Mara looked at the money. It was more than she had made in the past 3 days combined. Her mother's words echoed in her head, "The pain is bad today." There was a specialist in the city who could run the tests her mother needed, but the consultation fee alone was 4 figures. "What's your name?" she asked. Richard Sterling. She almost laughed. Of course. Sterling. It matched the monogrammed wallet, the yacht, the sunglasses, the entire aura of the man. All right, Mr. Sterling. I'll take you out. But you do exactly what I say, when I say it. The sea doesn't care about your money, and neither do I, understand? He smiled for the first time, a surprisingly genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. Understood. And please, call me Richard. Mara took him out on the Sea Whisper. She considered taking him on a bigger boat, something more comfortable, but some perverse part of her wanted him to see the reality of her life. The patched hull, the temperamental motor, the bench seat that had been repaired with duct tape. If he was going to play fisherman for a day, he could do it without the luxury. To his credit, Richard didn't complain. He sat where she told him to sit, held the rod the way she showed him, and listened when she explained the basics of trolling. He was clumsy at first, he snagged his line twice and nearly dropped the rod overboard once, but he was attentive and, she had to admit, a quick learner. They spent the morning on the water. Mara took him to the reef first, then to a deeper channel where the amberjack were running. Richard caught 3 fish, each one met with a boyish delight that seemed out of character for a man of his evident wealth. When he landed a 20-pound amberjack after a 15-minute fight, he actually whooped, his voice echoing across the empty sea. That's the best fight I've had in years, he said, breathing hard, his immaculate shirt now splashed with seawater and fish slime. My trainer keeps telling me to take up boxing, but this is better. Your trainer, Mara repeated flatly. I know how that sounds. Richard wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. I'm aware that I'm a walking cliché. Rich guy with a yacht, personal trainer, probably the kind of person you avoid. But I'll let you in on a secret. He leaned forward conspiratorially. I grew up fishing. Not like this, my grandfather had a cabin in Maine, and we'd go out for bluefish every summer. He taught me how to tie a clinch knot before I learned to ride a bike. I haven't done it in 20 years. I woke up a few days ago and realized I'd forgotten what it felt like. Mara studied him, trying to reconcile the image of the polished businessman with the kid in Maine learning to tie knots. So you bought a yacht and came out here to remember? Something like that. I sold my company 3 months ago. Sterling Seafoods, maybe you've heard of it. Mara's hand stilled on the tiller. Sterling Seafoods was one of the largest seafood distributors in the country, a name she saw on trucks, on restaurant menus, on the labels of the frozen fish at the supermarket. You're that Sterling. The second generation. My father built the company, I expanded it. We went from 12 restaurants to over 200, plus the distribution network. I sold it to a private equity firm for more money than I'll ever need. And then I woke up the morning after the deal closed and realized I had no idea what to do with myself. Mara didn't know what to say to that. Her own life had never included the luxury of not knowing what to do. Every day was a scramble, a calculation, a fight. The idea of having so much that you lost your purpose was so alien to her that it might as well have been a different language. So you're just wandering, she asked. I suppose I am. He looked out at the water, his expression pensive. I've spent the past 20 years building something. Now it's gone, not gone, but not mine anymore, and I'm trying to figure out who I am without it. This, he gestured at the sea, the boat, the fish, this is part of that. Mara was quiet for a moment, then she gestured at the amberjack. Are you going to eat that? I was hoping you'd tell me how to cook it. She snorted. You have a chef on that yacht of yours, don't you? I do. But I want to cook it myself. Over a fire, if possible. On the beach. The way my grandfather and I used to. It was such an unexpected request that Mara found herself agreeing before she could think better of it. There's a cove a mile south of here. Not many people know about it. I'll show you. The cove was a crescent of white sand tucked between two rocky headlands, accessible only by boat. Mara had been coming here since she was a child, swimming in the summer, collecting driftwood in the winter. She beached the Sea Whisper and showed Richard how to gut and clean the amberjack, then built a small fire while he watched with the fascination of a man who had probably never had to light his own campfire before. They cooked the fish on a flat rock heated in the coals, seasoning it with nothing but salt and a lemon that Mara had in her cooler. They ate with their fingers, sitting on the sand, watching the waves roll in. "This is the best meal I've had in years," Richard said, and there was no irony in his voice. "I've eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants all over the world. Nothing compares to this. It's the salt air," Mara said. "Makes everything taste better. It's not just the salt air." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Can I ask you something? How long have you been doing this? Fishing, I mean." "Since I could walk, basically. My dad was a fisherman. His dad was a fisherman. It's what my family does." "And do you like it?" It was such a simple question, but no one had ever asked her that before. "Do you like it?" As if liking it was a factor, as if she had a choice. "I love it," she said, and the words surprised her with their honesty. "I hate a lot of things about it, the uncertainty, the way the buyers screw us over, the fact that my hands are always cut up and I haven't slept past 5 in the morning in 10 years. But when I'm out there, on the water, it's the only place I feel like myself. It's the only thing I'm good at." Richard nodded slowly. "That's how I felt about my company. Before it got so big that I couldn't see the water anymore." He paused. "You said the buyers screw you over. How so?" Mara told him about Carver, about the market, about the way the system was rigged against small operators like her. She told him about the prices she got, the hoops she had to jump through, the way she was one bad season away from losing everything. She told him about her mother, the medication, the tests she couldn't afford. She wasn't sure why she was telling him all of this. Maybe it was the fire, the quiet of the cove, the strangeness of the day. Maybe it was the way he listened. Really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "What if I told you there was a different way?" he said finally. "What do you mean?" "I've been looking for something, Mara. A new project. Something real. I didn't just come here to fish, I came here to find suppliers. The private equity firm that bought Sterling Seafoods only took the distribution network and the restaurants. They didn't take my expertise, my contacts, or my capital. I'm starting something new. A premium seafood brand, direct from sustainable small-scale fisheries to high-end restaurants. No middlemen, no exploitation, no frozen fish. Just the best catch, handled properly, sold for what it's actually worth." Mara stared at him. "And what does that have to do with me?" "I've been watching this coast for 2 weeks, Richard said. Talking to people, doing research. But I haven't found the right partner yet. Someone who actually knows the water, who the other fishermen respect, who has the skill and the integrity I'm looking for. I think you might be that person." The fire crackled. The waves whispered on the sand. Mara felt like the world had tilted slightly on its axis. "You want me to be your partner," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to build something with you," Richard said. "I'll provide the capital, the business infrastructure, the market connections. You provide the knowledge, the local network, the soul of the operation. Equal partners. We build this together, from the ground up." "Equal partners," Mara repeated. "I don't have any money to invest. You have something more valuable. You have the sea." She looked out at the water, the endless blue, the thing that had given her everything and taken so much. For the first time in years, she felt something that she had almost forgotten, hope. "I need to think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need." Richard stood up, brushing sand from his trousers. "I'll be here for a while. The yacht isn't going anywhere." Chapter 3, The Weight of Water. Mara didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind rattle the window frames, and turned Richard's offer over in her mind like a shell she was trying to find the right angle on. Equal partners. The words were seductive, almost dangerously so. She had spent her entire life on the margins, scraping by, accepting whatever scraps the carvers of the world deigned to throw her. The idea of having power, of having control, of not being at the mercy of every bad season and every crooked buyer, was intoxicating. But she was not naive. She had learned, from her father and from her own hard experience, that nothing came for free. Richard Sterling was a businessman, a very successful one, and successful businessmen didn't get where they were by being charitable. What did he really want? What was the catch? She thought about it from every angle. The partnership made sense on paper, he had money and connections, she had local knowledge and skill. But partnerships could go bad. She could end up working for him in all but name, her ideas dismissed, her share whittled down to nothing by legal jargon she didn't understand. And yet the alternative was more of the same. More early mornings, more Carver, more watching her mother's health deteriorate because she couldn't afford the right care. More treading water until she eventually went under. At 3 a.m, she got up and went to the kitchen. Her mother was there, wrapped in a worn flannel robe, a cup of tea cooling untouched in front of her. The swollen knuckles of her hands were visible even in the dim light. "Can't sleep either?" her mother asked. "No." Mara sat down across from her. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "What would you do if someone offered you a chance to change everything? A real chance, but one that meant trusting someone you barely know?" Her mother studied her with eyes that had seen too much. "Is this about that man on the yacht?" Mara wasn't surprised she knew. In Port Haven, news traveled like a riptide. "He wants me to be his business partner. Some kind of seafood company. He has the money, I have the knowledge." "And what does your gut say?" "My gut says I'd be an idiot not to take it. But my gut has been wrong before." Her mother reached across the table and took Mara's hand, her grip gentle but steady despite the arthritis. "Your father was the same way. Always suspicious of good fortune. He used to say the sea never gives you anything, it only lends. But he also used to say that sometimes the tide brings something good, and when it does, you have to be brave enough to take it." Mara felt a lump form in her throat. "I miss him." "So do I, baby. Every day." Her mother squeezed her hand. "But he would want more for you than this. He would want you to have a life that isn't just survival. If this man is offering you a real chance, you should take it. Just make sure you read whatever you sign." Mara laughed, a watery sound. "I was going to ask Eleanor's son to look it over. He's studying law." "Good. Smart." Her mother smiled. "Look at you, already thinking like a businesswoman." The next morning, Mara went to the harbor and found Richard sitting on a bench near the dock, drinking coffee from a paper cup. He looked up when she approached, and something in his expression told her he hadn't slept much either. "I've been thinking," she said. "So have I." He gestured for her to sit. "Before you say anything, I want to be completely transparent with you. I had my lawyer draw up a preliminary agreement last night. Not a final contract, just a framework. Something we can look at together." He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Mara took it, her hand surprisingly steady. She scanned the pages, her eyes catching on phrases like equity split, decision-making authority, profit distribution. It was a lot of legal language, but the core of it was clear, a 50-50 partnership in a new company, with Richard providing the initial capital as an interest-free loan to be repaid from future profits. Mara would contribute her expertise, her fishing operation, and her local relationships. All major decisions would require mutual agreement. "This seems fair," she said cautiously. "It is fair. I'm not looking to take advantage of you, Mara. I'm looking for a real partner. Someone I can build something with." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I did some more research last night. I looked into the local fishing industry here, the prices, the quotas, the supply chains. It's broken. The small producers are getting crushed. The big buyers like Carver have a stranglehold. But it doesn't have to be that way. With the right infrastructure, we could bypass the whole corrupt system and sell directly to restaurants and premium markets. We could pay the fishermen a fair price and still make a healthy profit. And you think I can help you do that?" "I know you can. You have relationships with the other small boats. You know who's honest and who's not. You know where the best fishing grounds are, and you know how to fish them sustainably. That's the other thing, the market is moving towards sustainability. Restaurants want to be able to tell their customers that their seafood is ethically sourced. I want our company to be the gold standard for that." Mara looked out at the harbor, at the fishing boats bobbing gently on the gray water. She thought about all the people she knew, the deckhands, the boat owners, the women who mended the nets and the kids who helped their parents on the docks. All of them trapped in the same system, all of them struggling. "If we do this," she said slowly, "I want to bring other people in. Not just me. I want the other small boats to have a fair shot too. I want to create something that helps the whole community, not just me." Richard's smile was slow and genuine. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Chapter 4, Building the Dream. The next 3 months were the busiest of Mara's life. She and Richard met almost every day, sometimes in the small office he had rented above the harbormaster's shack, sometimes on the Sea Whisper, sometimes at her mother's kitchen table. They worked through the details of the business plan, argued about strategy, and slowly, painstakingly, built the foundation of what would become Ocean's Bounty. The legal agreement was finalized after 2 weeks of negotiation and review. Mara's law student friend confirmed that it was indeed fair, shockingly fair, in fact. She would own 50% of the company, with full voting rights and equal say in all major decisions. Richard was putting up the capital, but the debt was structured so that it wouldn't crush her if things went wrong. The first thing they needed was a proper facility. Richard found an old warehouse on the harbor that had been used for boat storage, and they leased it with an option to buy. Mara supervised the renovations, turning the cavernous space into a state-of-the-art seafood processing center with cold storage, filleting stations, and a receiving dock. She hired a crew, locals, people she knew and trusted, people who had been ground down by the old system and were hungry for something new. The second thing they needed was product. Mara spent weeks visiting the other small boat captains, sitting in their galleys and on their porches, explaining what she and Richard were trying to build. Some were skeptical. A few were outright hostile, convinced that this was just another scheme that would end with the little guy getting screwed. But most were willing to listen, especially when she told them the prices she was offering, prices that were 40, 50, sometimes 60% higher than what Carver paid. "We're cutting out the middleman," she told them, over and over. "You bring your catch directly to us. We process it, package it, and ship it to restaurants the same day. No waiting for payment, no haggling, no getting cheated on the scales. You get paid what the fish is actually worth." The first captain to sign on was old Tomas Reyes, a grizzled veteran whose family had been fishing these waters for 3 generations. He had a sturdy trawler and a reputation for honest dealing. After Tomas came the Delgado brothers, who ran 2 fast day boats and specialized in tuna. Then came Sarah Chen, a single mother who fished solo on a small skiff and had been barely making ends meet. One by one, the fleet grew. Richard, meanwhile, was working the other end of the chain. He called in favors from every chef, restaurateur, and food buyer he had ever worked with. He flew to the city and did tastings, bringing coolers of Mara's fresh catch to demonstrate the quality. Within a month, they had signed contracts with 12 high-end restaurants, including 2 with Michelin stars. The first shipment went out on a Tuesday in June. Mara stood on the loading dock and watched as the refrigerated truck pulled away, its cargo of pristine snapper, grouper, and amberjack bound for the city. She felt a lump in her throat that she couldn't quite explain. Richard came to stand beside her. "How does it feel?" "Like I'm dreaming," she admitted. "Like I'm going to wake up and be back on the Sea Whisper, haggling with Carver." "This isn't a dream. This is real. And it's just the beginning." He put his hand on her shoulder, a brief, warm pressure. "We're going to change this industry, Mara. You and me." Chapter 5, Rough Water. Not everyone was happy about the changes coming to Port Haven. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a visit from Carver himself. He showed up at the warehouse one afternoon, his red face even redder than usual, 2 of his thick-necked associates flanking him like bodyguards. "I hear you're trying to put me out of business," he said to Mara, his voice deceptively calm. Mara was filleting fish at the stainless steel table, her knife steady in her hand despite the sudden spike of adrenaline. "I'm not trying to put anyone out of business. I'm just offering the fishermen a better deal." "Better deal?" Carver spat on the concrete floor. "You're poaching my suppliers. You think you can just waltz in here with your fancy money and your city boyfriend and change the way things work? Things work the way they work for a reason, sweetheart. Don't call me that. I'll call you whatever I want." He stepped closer, his bulk looming. "Here's how this is going to go. You're going to shut down this little operation of yours. You're going to tell the fishermen to come back to me. And in return, I won't make your life very, very difficult." Mara set down her knife and met his eyes. She was afraid, she could feel her heart pounding, but she was also angry, an anger that had been building for years, an anger that had finally found an outlet. "Get out of my facility," she said, her voice low and steady. "And if you ever threaten me again, I'll have you arrested for harassment." Carver stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, an ugly sound. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts don't mean anything when you're swimming with sharks." He turned and lumbered out, his associates following. At the door, he paused. "Accidents happen on the water, you know. Boats sink. Lines get cut. Just something to think about." When he was gone, Mara's hands started to shake. She gripped the edge of the table and forced herself to breathe. That evening, she told Richard what had happened. His expression darkened. "We need to take this seriously," he said. "Carver isn't just a bully, he's got a lot to lose. If our operation succeeds, his whole business model collapses. People like that don't go down without a fight. What do? We protect ourselves. Security cameras at the facility. Insurance on all the boats. And we document everything, every threat, every incident. If he tries anything, we'll have a paper trail." He paused, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "I've dealt with people like him before. The key is not to back down." Over the next few weeks, there were incidents. The tires on the delivery truck were slashed. A freezer unit was tampered with, spoiling $1,000 worth of product. One of the Delgado brothers found his boat's fuel line cut, fortunately before he left the dock. Each time, Mara filed a police report. Each time, there was no evidence linking Carver to the crime, but everyone knew who was behind it. The fishermen, far from being scared off, grew angrier. They had all suffered under Carver's thumb for years, and now that they had a taste of freedom, they were not about to give it up. Tomas Reyes organized a watch rotation at the docks. Sarah Chen installed cameras on her skiff. The community rallied around Ocean's bounty in a way that made Mara's throat tight with emotion. Then came the storm. It was late August, and the weather forecast had been calling for a tropical depression to move up the coast. Most of the fleet stayed in port, but one of their newest suppliers, a young fisherman named Jake, had been out near the reef and didn't make it back in time. By the time the storm hit, he was missing, and the Coast Guard couldn't launch a rescue until the weather cleared. Mara spent the night in the warehouse office, watching the rain lash the windows and praying to every god she could think of. Richard stayed with her, making calls, coordinating with the Coast Guard, trying to keep hope alive. At dawn, the storm broke. The sea was still rough, but the wind had died down enough for a search. Mara and Richard took the Sea Whisper out, along with half a dozen other boats from the fleet. They fanned out across the search grid, scanning the heaving water for any sign of Jake or his boat. It was Mara who spotted him. A flash of orange, a life jacket, bobbing in the swell about 2 miles from the reef. Jake was clinging to a piece of wreckage, barely conscious, his lips blue with cold. They hauled him aboard and wrapped him in blankets, and Mara held his hand all the way back to the harbor, talking to him, keeping him awake. Jake survived. His boat was a total loss, but the insurance that Richard had insisted on covered most of the replacement cost. A week later, Mara and Richard announced that Ocean's Bounty was establishing a hardship fund for any fisherman in their network who suffered a loss, funded by a percentage of the company's profits. It was that, more than anything else, that solidified the loyalty of the fleet. They weren't just suppliers anymore. They were part of something. A family. Chapter 6, The Turning Tide. The incident with Jake, and the company's response to it, shifted something in the town. People who had been sitting on the fence came over to Ocean's Bounty's side. Even the local paper wrote a story about them, painting Mara as a hometown hero and Richard as the unlikely ally who had brought hope back to Port Haven. Carver, meanwhile, was losing ground. His suppliers had dwindled to a handful of holdouts, and his wholesale business was suffering. He tried to undercut Ocean's Bounty's prices, but he couldn't match their quality or their reliability. The restaurants wanted the best, and the best was coming from Mara's operation. In September, Richard got a call from a seafood buyer at one of the country's largest supermarket chains. They were looking to launch a premium sustainable seafood line and wanted to source from small-scale fisheries. Could Ocean's Bounty handle the volume? "It's a huge opportunity," Richard said, laying out the proposal on the conference table. "National distribution. A contract worth millions. But it would require us to scale up significantly. More boats, more processing capacity, more staff." Mara studied the numbers. Her business instincts, which had been dormant her whole life, had awakened over the past months. She understood margins and supply chains now. She could read a balance sheet. She knew that this was the kind of deal that could make Ocean's Bounty a major player. "We'd need to bring in more fishermen," she said. "Not just from Port Haven. The next town over, Clearwater, they've got a fleet that's been struggling too. I know some people there. Can we trust them? I'll make sure of it." They spent the next 2 months expanding. Mara traveled up and down the coast, recruiting new suppliers, vetting their practices, ensuring they met Ocean's Bounty's sustainability standards. Richard handled the business negotiations, the legal contracts, the logistics of a national supply chain. They hired a management team to handle the day-to-day operations, freeing them up to focus on strategy. The deal with the supermarket chain went through in November. The first shipment. 10,000 pounds of premium snapper and grouper, all caught within 48 hours, all traceable back to the specific boat and fisherman, was a success. The chain ordered more. Then another chain called. Then a meal kit delivery service. Then an airline looking to upgrade its first-class menu. By the end of the first year, Ocean's Bounty was profitable. By the end of the second year, it was thriving. The company had 50 boats in its network, a state-of-the-art processing facility, and contracts with over 200 restaurants and retailers. Revenue had grown from nothing to $18 million, with projections for the following year pushing past $30 million. Mara Kincaid, the fisherwoman who had once haggled with Old Man Carver for pennies, was now a wealthy woman. Her share of the company was worth several $1,000,000 on paper, and she was drawing a six-figure salary. She moved her mother out of the rented cottage and into a comfortable house overlooking the harbor. She bought a new truck, then a second boat, then invested in a scholarship fund for the children of local fishermen. She never stopped fishing, though. At least once a week, she took the Sea Whisper out before dawn, alone, and fished the old way. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. Because the sea was in her blood, and no amount of money would ever change that. Chapter 7, Deeper Currents. Somewhere along the way, without either of them quite noticing, the partnership between Mara and Richard had become something more. It happened gradually, the way the tide comes in, imperceptible at first, then suddenly impossible to ignore. There were long nights at the office, working side by side, their conversations drifting from business to life, to fears and hopes and the small, quiet things that made up a person. There were meals shared, laughter, arguments that ended in grudging respect. There was the way Richard looked at her when she was talking about the sea, and the way her heart did something strange when he smiled. The first time he kissed her was on the deck of the Sea Whisper, at sunset, after they had spent the day fishing together, not for work, just for the joy of it. The sky was a blaze of orange and pink, and the water was calm, and when he leaned in, she didn't pull away. "I've been wanting to do that for a long time," he said quietly, his forehead resting against hers. "How long?" "Since the day on the beach. When you cooked that fish on the rock." Mara laughed softly. "That was 2 years ago." "I know. I'm not always quick about these things." She kissed him back, and it felt like coming home to a harbor she hadn't known she was searching for. Their relationship wasn't without complications. There was talk in the town, some of it unkind. People whispered that she had only gotten where she was because of him, that she was sleeping her way to success. The whispers stung, but Mara had learned to deal with worse. She let her work speak for itself, and she and Richard made a point of maintaining professional boundaries in public. Privately, though, they built a life together. Richard sold the yacht, he said he didn't need it anymore, and bought a house on the cliffs outside Port Haven. Mara spent more nights there than she did at her own place, until eventually she just moved in. Her mother adored Richard, and he treated the older woman with a tenderness that made Mara's heart ache. They were partners in every sense of the word now, business partners, life partners, best friends. And the company they had built together continued to grow, a testament to what was possible when two very different people found common ground. Chapter 8, The Next Horizon. 5 years after that first morning on the dock, Ocean's Bounty was one of the most respected names in the seafood industry. The company had been profiled in business magazines, praised for its sustainability practices, and held up as a model for how to do ethical business in a challenging industry. Mara stood at the window of her corner office, yes, she had a corner office now, with a view of the harbor, and watched the boats coming in. The fleet had grown to over 100 vessels, ranging from small day boats to larger trawlers, all of them flying the Ocean's Bounty flag. The processing facility had tripled in size and employed over 200 people from the surrounding communities. She was 30 years old now, and she looked different than the woman who had hauled crab pots in the pre-dawn dark. She still wore her hair pulled back, but the elastic band had been replaced with a silver clip. Her hands were still capable, still calloused in places, but they were also adorned with a simple ring, a pearl set in white gold, a gift from Richard on the day he had asked her to marry him. The wedding had been small, held on the beach in the cove where they had cooked that first fish together. The entire fleet had turned out, their boats forming a circle in the water, horns blaring in celebration. Even Old Man Carver, who had eventually sold his crumbling business to Ocean's Bounty for a fraction of what it had once been worth, had sent a grudging card. Mara's mother was still alive, her arthritis managed with the best care money could buy. She lived in the house on the cliffs with Mara and Richard, and she spent her days in the garden, her hands still able to tend the roses that climbed the stone walls. The company had made Mara rich, truly rich, the kind of wealth she had never imagined for herself. But the money, she had discovered, was not the point. The point was the freedom it gave her, and the power to make things better for others. The scholarship fund had grown into a full foundation, supporting the education of fishing families up and down the coast. The hardship fund had saved a dozen businesses from ruin. And the fishermen who supplied Ocean's bounty were paid fairly, treated with respect, and given a voice in how the company was run. Richard came into the office, a tablet in his hand, his reading glasses pushed up on his head. He was graying more now, distinguished and handsome in a way that still made her smile. "The numbers for the third quarter are in," he said. "We're up 12%. That's good." "It is. But that's not what I wanted to talk to you about." He set the tablet down and came to stand beside her at the window. "I've been thinking about the future." "What about it?" "We've done a lot, you and I, built something incredible. But I keep wondering, what's next? We've got the fleet, the processing, the distribution. What if we went further? What if we started opening our own restaurants? Ocean to table, completely integrated. The customers could trace every fish back to the exact boat that caught it. We could control the whole experience, from the water to the plate." Mara considered it. The idea was ambitious, but ambition had become a habit. "Where would we start?" "Here. In Port Haven. A flagship restaurant on the harbor, showcasing everything we do. If it works, we expand. Slowly, carefully, the way we've done everything else." She turned to look at him, this man who had walked into her life with a fishing rod and a question she hadn't known she needed to answer. He was still the same person, underneath the success, still the boy who had fished with his grandfather, still the man who had been looking for something real. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." He smiled, that slow genuine smile that she had first seen on the Sea Whisper. "I was hoping you'd say that." Epilogue, The Sea Remembers. The restaurant opened on the first day of summer, a bright, airy space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. They called it the Salt Line, and its menu changed daily based on what the boats brought in. The head chef was a local woman Mara had grown up with, someone who understood the fish and the traditions of the coast. On opening night, every table was full. Food critics, business associates, and, most importantly, the fishermen and their families, dressed up and proud, eating the food that they had helped bring to the plate. Mara and Richard sat at a corner table, holding hands under the white linen. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Outside the window, the harbor lights reflected on the dark water, and the Sea Whisper, still seaworthy, still beloved, bobbed gently at her usual dock. After dinner, Mara slipped away from the party and walked down to the water's edge. The air was warm, the sky full of stars. She took off her shoes and let the cool water lap at her feet, the same water that had been the backdrop of her entire life. She thought about her father, about the day he had first taken her out on the boat and shown her how to bait a hook. She thought about her mother's hands, knitting baskets, fighting through pain. She thought about all the mornings she had woken up in the dark, not knowing if she would have enough to get through the day. And she thought about what she had learned, that the sea was harsh and beautiful and unforgiving, but it was also full of gifts for those who knew how to find them. That sometimes the stranger on the dock was not a threat but a door. That you could be poor in money but rich in knowledge, and that the one could be transformed into the other if you had courage and luck and someone who believed in you. Richard came up behind her, his footsteps soft on the sand. "There you are. I was looking for you." "I'm just saying hello to the sea," she said. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, the warmth of his body a steady anchor. "Happy?" he asked. She looked out at the dark water, the endless horizon, the future stretching before them like an open net. "Yes," she said. I really am. They stood there together, the fisherwoman and the businessman, the partners, the lovers, the dreamers. Behind them, the restaurant glowed with light and laughter. Ahead of them, the sea whispered its ancient secrets, the same secrets it had been telling for 1,000 years, to anyone who had the ears to hear. Mara Kincaid had learned to listen. And the tide, at last, had brought her home.